The cracked earth stretched endlessly before Queen Nazima as she rode through what had once been the most fertile farmland in the Sokoto Caliphate. The skeletal remains of millet stalks jutted from the hardened soil like the ribs of some great beast that had died under the merciless sun. It had been 8 months since the last meaningful rainfall, and the drought that gripped her kingdom showed no signs of breaking. Her horses' hooves raised small clouds of dust with each step, and Nazima pulled her wrapper closer around her face to shield against the gritty wind that carried the scent of desperation. This was the 4th village she had visited this week, and each one told the same heartbreaking story: empty granaries, dying livestock, and children with hollow eyes who no longer had the energy to play. "Your Majesty," said Malam Osman, the village head of Banin Gwari, his voice hoarse from dust and worry, "we have eaten our seed grain. The wells have run dry. Some families have already begun the journey south, abandoning their ancestral homes to search for work in the cities." Nazima's heart clenched as she watched a young mother trying to nurse an infant while her own body showed the signs of starvation. The woman's wrapper hung loose on her diminished frame, and her eyes held the desperate calculation of someone deciding which meal to skip so her children could eat. "How many have left?" Nazima asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Nearly half the village, Your Majesty. And more leave each day. The lucky ones find work as laborers. The unlucky ones." He trailed off, but they both knew what he meant. Desperation made people vulnerable to the same traders who had once taken Nazima herself. That evening, in her traveling tent pitched on the outskirts of the dying village, Queen Nazima sat with her advisors as they delivered report after report of similar devastation throughout her kingdom. Commander Hassan, now grayed with years of loyal service, spoke with the grim efficiency of a soldier delivering casualty reports. The northern provinces report livestock deaths at 70%. The central regions have lost half their population to migration. The southern areas are overwhelmed with refugees who have no resources left to sustain themselves. Nazima listened to each statistic, but behind the numbers she saw faces: children she had blessed at naming ceremonies, mothers who attended her schools, fathers who had fought beside her husband in border conflicts. These weren't statistics, they were her people, and they were dying while she sat in relative comfort. "What of the royal treasury?" she asked. Malam Suleiman, her treasurer, shifted uncomfortably. "Your Majesty, we have sufficient reserves to maintain the palace and essential services for perhaps 2 years, but if we were to distribute food aid to all who need it, we would bankrupt the kingdom," Nazima finished. "But what good is a treasury if there are no people left to rule?" The tent fell silent except for the sound of wind whipping through the drought-stricken landscape. Her advisors exchanged glances, recognizing the tone in their queen's voice that meant she was about to make a decision they might not like. "Your Majesty," said Alhaji Gabra, one of her newer counselors, "surely there are other solutions. We could request aid from neighboring kingdoms, or perhaps implement a taxation system on the wealthy merchants." "And how long would such negotiations take?" Nazima interrupted. "How many children will die of hunger while we draft letters and arrange meetings? How many mothers will bury their babies while we debate the proper diplomatic protocols?" She stood abruptly, pacing to the tent opening where she could see the village's fading cooking fires, too few of them, burning too dimly, sustained by too little fuel. In one of those compounds, she knew, families were gathering around empty pots, their children crying from hunger while their parents whispered prayers for deliverance. "I have made my decision," she announced, turning back to face her advisors. "Tomorrow we begin distributing the royal reserves. All of them." The protest erupted immediately. "Your Majesty, you cannot. The kingdom's stability." What if other crises arise? But Nazima held up her hand for silence, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had survived the unthinkable. Listen to me, all of you. I was once a girl who knew what it meant to go to bed hungry, to wake up uncertain if there would be food that day. I know what desperation tastes like, what it sounds like when a child cries from an empty belly. Her voice grew stronger with each word, fueled by memories that had never lost their power to move her. I swore when I became queen that no child in my kingdom would ever know that hunger if I had the power to prevent it. But Your Majesty, Maulam Suleiman pleaded, if we empty the treasury, how will we rebuild? How will we fund the army, the schools, the infrastructure? Nazima smiled, but it was not the gentle smile of a peaceful queen. It was the fierce expression of a woman who had learned to find strength in sacrifice. The same way I rebuilt my own life after I lost everything, with determination, hard work, and faith that Allah rewards those who care for the least among us. The next morning, the distribution began. Queen Nazima herself supervised the opening of the royal granaries, her hands helping to measure grain into the containers that desperate families carried from village to village. She had traded her silk robes for simple cotton, her jeweled crown for a practical head covering, but her presence electrified every location they visited. The queen gives from her own stores, whispered amazed villagers. She does not send servants, she comes herself. In village after village, the scene was the same. Families who had given up hope watched in disbelief as the royal convoy arrived with wagons full of grain, dried meat, and medical supplies. Children who had grown listless with hunger suddenly found energy to laugh and play. Mothers who had aged years in months began to straighten their shoulders with renewed hope. But it was in the village of Drought that Nazima encountered the moment that would define not just her response to the drought, but her understanding of what it truly meant to be a queen. An old woman, bent with age and weakness, approached the distribution point where Nazima was personally ladling grain into containers. The woman's wrapper was patched and repatched, her head tie faded from years of sun and washing, but she carried herself with a dignity that poverty could not touch. Your Majesty, the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper, I have nothing to offer in return for your kindness. But I want you to know, I remember you. Nazima looked more closely at the woman's face, searching her memory. Something familiar stirred in her recognition, something that made her heart race with sudden understanding. I was in the market the day you were taken, the woman continued, tears flowing down her weathered cheeks. I was Hajia Asabe then, and I saw that wicked woman Zainab hand you over to those evil men. I saw you crying, begging for mercy. And her voice broke with shame, I did nothing. I told myself it was not my business, that I could not interfere. I have carried that shame for 15 years. The grain scoop trembled in Nazima's hands as the memory crashed over her, the market square, the faces of bystanders who had watched her word end, the realization that no one would speak for her because she was just a powerless child. I watched you disappear into that terrible life, Hajia Asabe continued, and I never thought I would see you again. But here you are, a queen, saving us all. How can you show such kindness to people who failed you when you needed us most? Nazima set down the scoop and took the old woman's hands, feeling the calluses of a lifetime of hard work, the tremor of age and malnutrition. But she also felt the courage it had taken to speak this truth, to confess a failure that had haunted her for years. Hajia Asabe, she said gently, you could not save me then because you did not have the power. But I have that power now, and I choose to use it not for revenge, but for the same reason my father taught me to help others, because we are all Allah's children, and when one suffers, we all suffer. She filled the woman's container with grain, then added extra portions for cooking oil and dried dates. Take this with my blessing, and know that your shame ends today. You have given me something more valuable than gold. You have shown me that my suffering was not meaningless if it taught me how to ease the suffering of others. As Hajia Asabe walked away, clutching her provisions and weeping openly, Nazima felt a profound shift in her understanding of her own story. She had always seen her rise from slavery to queenship as a personal triumph, but now she understood it was something far greater. It was preparation for this moment, when her people needed someone who truly understood their desperation. The drought continued for 3 more months, but no one in the Sokoto Caliphate died of starvation. When the rains finally came, flooding the parched earth and filling the air with the sweet scent of renewed life, the royal treasury was empty, but the kingdom was full of people whose loyalty had been earned through sacrifice, whose respect had been won through shared suffering. King Aminu found his wife in the palace gardens on the first morning after the drought officially ended, watching the servants replant the flower beds that had been sacrificed to grow food crops. Her hands, once soft with royal privilege, now bore the calluses of someone who had personally loaded grain wagons and dug irrigation channels. "My beloved queen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "the other rulers think I married a madwoman. They say no monarch in history has emptied their treasury for commoners." Nazima turned to him, her face radiant with a peace that had nothing to do with material wealth. "And what do you say to them, my king?" Aminu took her Wakrafan hands and kissed them tenderly. "I tell them I married a woman who understands that a crown means nothing if the heads it rules are bowed with hunger. I tell them I am married to the only queen I know who became more powerful by giving away her power." As they stood together watching their kingdom come back to life, Nazima thought about the girl she had once been, hungry, powerless, sold like an animal because she had no value in the eyes of those who controlled her fate. That girl could never have imagined that she would one day hold the power to save thousands from the same desperation she had known. But she had done more than save them from hunger. She had shown them that true leadership meant sharing in their struggles, that real strength came from lifting others up rather than standing above them. The former slave had not just become a queen, she had redefined what queenship meant in a kingdom that would never forget the woman who chose to empty her treasury rather than let her people starve. The drought had ended, but its lessons would endure forever. Queen Nazima had proven that the greatest rulers are not those born to power, but those who understand powerlessness and choose to use their strength in service of those who have none.